need to think about learning spaces much more flexibly than we have in the past. And that, therefore, has a role for place-based planning. How is this inventory distributed relative to the young learners today and 10 years from now? Demography, we have some sense of at least what the population of children, the very young population of children are today, and where they're going to be in education 10 years from now, et cetera. So how is that changing? And what is the physical condition of the inventory? Where's the birth to 5 programming offered across this region? How do participation rates vary among eligible learners? Is the nature of the programming different across the geography, and is it evidence-based? Regionally, how much is spent on after-school programming? How many different agencies deliver it? Does it appear enrollees are making more progress in school than non-enrollees? Who is served and who is missed? So you can imagine if you sort of sat down right now and we said, okay, we believe that after-school programs, if delivered well with evidence, could help us sort of move the education dial, the achievement dial. Could you tell me, within a month, how much this region is spending on after-school programs and where, and who is being served by them? Portland can't, and I would be surprised if Las Vegas is in that position, but it's an important question to ask and answer. And then again, sort of what is the spatial relationship between high schools and post-secondary institutions? How does that affect collaboration opportunities for dual enrollment and other methods of accelerated learning? The list, these are just sort of the first dozen or so questions off the top of my head, but you can imagine lots and lots of questions that a group like you could come up with and drill down on. So how have other regions organized to answer some of these questions? Just a couple of examples. First, Cincinnati and Strive, and I think I even overheard some people talking about Cradle to Career and Strive. It's active in this region a little bit. Anybody here? There. Okay, so we do have some folks that are participating in Strive. And Portland is as well, and our firm, Echo Northwest, sort of collaborates on the data side with the Strive effort in Portland. In essence, Strive it's a framework to pull groups like this together to sort of develop vision, come up with evidence-based decision-making, make collaborative action on resource deployment, making sure that all the different actors that are delivering similarly situated kind of programming know that they're doing that and are sort of aligned in their planning, and then are making good use of increasingly tight investment dollar opportunities. Here's an example of some data that we have created for our Strive partners in Oregon. This is basically, we have a longitudinal database of all the kids in the state of Oregon and are able to follow them through school with their test scores and into college, wherever they happen to go to college. And this, sort of all the analyses and charts that we've done, I think is one of the most important ones. And basically says, okay, if we look at where a kid stands in 7th grade on their math test, the state standardized math test, what are the odds, so we know this as of 7th grade, what are the odds that they're going to graduate from high school? What are the odds that they're going to enroll in a 2-year institution? What are the odds that they're going to enroll in a 4-year institution? So this is the bottom 6th of the kids, here's the big middle 2/3, and here's the top 6 of kids. And what this chart tells me is that this whole notion of at-risk and not at-risk kids is sort of an archaic notion that you could put kids into 2 groups of kids who are either at risk or they're not at risk. Well, this chart would suggest that really you're talking about degrees of risk. And you just have a continuum. It's a pretty smooth continuum up until you get pretty far down here until you're relatively certain that these kids are going to graduate from high school. So, the question that I would pose to our partners in Portland is, okay, we invest a lot of money in after-school programs and mentoring programs, et cetera. Where along this continuum who are you serving? Are you serving kids over here? Are you serving kids here? Which program, and where along this continuum are you not serving kids? And which kids are being missed? So, again, sitting down sort of across programs and with good data, I think is critical. Portland has a very robust regional government, metro, and has been operating for years, and they love data. And they have something called a context tool that they do some mapping with. And Lisa, I don't know if I can switch to this. Can I switch this little? I've got a live version of this little tool that and I'm almost at the end of my slides here, so we are getting close.
I think it was closed.
Was it closed? Okay. Okay. So this is a little tool that this is a collaboration of superintendents and planners in Portland, and really the question was that we have a very well-liked retired superintendent from Hillsborough, which is where Intel is. And he said, I never really had very good information about if I needed to make a capital decision. I didn't know sort of what the criteria I would use is, or how to rank order where to make those investments. So they created this nice tool. You can't see the schools on there until I light them up. But they basically said, we're going to start with these demographic indicators as things. These might be different indicators that we use to prioritize where we're going to make our facility investments. So we had some demographic indicators like the share on free and reduced price lunch, or the graduation rate, et cetera. And then we have some facility indicators. What's the condition of the facility? And so, for example, you could say, you could start with, well, look at that. It's just not behaving now. Well, you could start with seismic, and it would light up all the ones that are about to fall over with an earthquake. And then you would overlay that with poverty, and you'd sort of see where are poor kids in particularly bad learning environments. I would extend this map to then say, in terms of a planning context, I would like to see where the schools are and their achievement relative to mentoring facilities, to pre-K programs, and to other community-based services, all in one place. You can sort of see what's going on. Now I'm just going to wrap up. Let's see here. I'll come back here. And let's see here, view the slideshow.
Down on the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side.
On the bottom.
Down here?
Yep.
That one, slideshow. Okay, so anyway, they have a very nice map. I assume that. What they haven't been able to do yet is to sort of put those facilities side by side and understand which kids have access and which kids don't. But they're on their way. Last one, Washington, D.C. and 21st Century Schools, was a collaboration between an outfit called 21st Century Schools, which is focused on equity, access to good physical facilities in the Washington, D.C., well, nationally, but especially in Washington, D.C. for this effort. The Urban Institute and Brookings, again, which does wonderful work, and you're very lucky to have them. So they did this work back in 2008. And basically, sort of in the same way that Lisa is planning generally, starting to look at, okay, we've got different alternative futures. So we're back here in 2006, and they were looking at 2015. You know, the school district could look very different depending on how intentionally we try to direct families and kids into schools that public schools that they will attend. So they had sort of three scenarios. They said, look, if you just go forward and we just kind of live with the existing trends, your enrollment will probably go up by about 5,000 kids. If you're very intentional and you improve the quality of schools and you may build some affordable housing around schools that are more likely to be attractive to families, you could get as much as maybe 12,000 more. And then the most favorable one was attracting more families to the region, and you could get up to 20,000. So lots of good questions to ask and answer. Again, with planning, you can, with some place-based strategies, you can shape your future to some degree. And that's what this work was about. So I'm going to skip through these and just sort of end on this piece, which is just one more call to say that there's an awful lot that goes on in and around the community that we, with increasing certainty, know is critical to reducing the achievement gap and getting kids off to a good start, particularly in an environment where low-income families are being left behind relative to their high-income peers in increasingly unequal income situations. So better coordination is critical. Data has to be part of that, and we have gone from literally walking out of the dark ages and now have the ability to really understand and benchmark in much more sophisticated ways in terms of how things are going in and around the schools than we had the ability to do 10, 15 years ago. And so getting up to speed on longitudinal databases and acting and building loops of continuous improvement is critical. Access to these programs, if it's not physically available to the kid nearby, obviously transportation is an option, but making sure that low-income kids have access to these programs that we know matter. And needless to say, and one that I haven't harped on a lot here, but I will harp on now, is schools really do drive the value of the region. One little statistic that I haven't thrown out yet, but will now, is a simple rating. I didn't check to see if Nevada has sort of statewide ratings of schools. Florida has an A, B, C, D, F rating. Oregon had a exceptional, strong, et cetera rating. In Florida, they did a study that basically said that rating of an A, if you were a consistent A school, holding constant actually what the actual kids were achieving in the schools, holding that constant. If you were rated an A, it increased the property values in the school's catch area by 10%. So there's a big relationship and sort of further evidence that planning has an important role and community developers an important role in this conversation. So with that, I will pause, and I think we're going to do questions and answers if you have.
You just had to stand next to me. We're going to make sure to get a mic to people so that we can get your questions recorded. I'll be selfish and take the first question. I heard a few different policy ideas that you suggested around housing and coordination. Perhaps one that we could even capture in the regional plan could talk more about working more consistently with schools and educators to to work in tandem around these communities. If you could pinpoint a particular housing strategy or a particular strategy that we would be addressing through this regional plan, which one would you really push us to discuss further?
Well, I would, if you're going to focus on housing, you have, I mean, you will be thinking about where to put affordable housing in the region. And you do have schools of relative attractiveness, given their current reputations. You can have an impact on the share of kids going into public schools if you can selectively put some of your affordable housing proximate to schools that have strong reputations that parents are going to enroll their kids in. And that obviously has, it has challenges and political challenges, et cetera. But that was sort of the point of that Washington, D.C. exercise. They said, look, if you think intentionally about this and strategically about it, you can change the path of enrollment.
There's two of your statistics were interesting to me. One was certainly the more words you speak to a child, that they're going to learn quicker. So it's, parental engagement, obviously, is the single most critical factor. But I was surprised by the fact that the pre-K and the Head Start programs did not have much influence. So based on what you're discussing here, is that because you believe those communities don't have access to it, or is it a problem in programming? The assumption would be that if they're taken out of that family environment, put into one where there's more engagement, that they would improve, but the statistics aren't showing that.
Yeah, and I sit on the board of the Children's Institute in Oregon, which is the sort of the advocacy nonprofit for early childhood education. So this hits close to home. It's sort of the difference between very specific, well-delivered interventions, like Perry High Scope, Carolina Citadarian, the program in Chicago. Very specific interventions have been able to prove impact, big impact. Perry High Scope, they followed kids deep into adulthood and found differences in earnings and corrections, et cetera. The challenge is the big federal expansion of that through Head Start has had pretty mixed, sort of mixed results, and it has to do with mixed implementation. It's sort of like the comparison between very intentional, specific, individual KIP interventions in charter schools, and then looking at all of the rest of them on average. So I am a big believer in early childhood. James Heckman, the Nobel laureate, would argue that in terms of all of the policies, all of economic development policies that this country could invest in any topic, that would be his choice. But it comes down to implementation quality.
So I too had a couple of different questions for you. The first one is looking at your chart about 7th graders and looking at their math scores and their predictability of graduating or going on to higher ed. It kind of begs the question, is there a way that we can look younger than 7th grade?
Right,
Because
unequivocally. And the only reason we're looking at this is because that's all the data that we have. We started with our database in 2003-04 was sort of the first year that we had. And so every year we get more and more and more. We add one more year and we can make this chart go deeper.
So you can go back in a few years and look at
3rd grade.
Yeah.
Right, and what we're going to do in Portland with the help of the United Way there is match these data with the juvenile justice system and the Department of Corrections. And so then you'll have another chart on here, or another line, unfortunately, which will be the odds of being involved in the criminal justice system.
Wow, yeah. And so my second question is, there are rankings that come out on Clark County schools, and based on those rankings, as a parent, you can, if your child is zoned for a school that's failing, you can enroll them as long as you provide the transportation and there's room at another school. So is that a model that is happening other placements, and are you seeing success with that?
Well, I mean, that was kind of broadly a model embedded in No Child Left Behind as federal policy, and it is a pure market-based intervention. The question is, if the market leaves the school, at what point you have the staters to be concerned about, and what do you do about the non-choosers? So if it's a family and you've got motivated parents who are engaged in moving their kids out, and you aren't, what is your intervention then with those who are left behind? That's always the question. And in Portland's experience, they had the same policy and ended up with a very, very small high school and never closed it, and ended up with a school that accommodated 2,500 to 3,000 kids and 400 kids in it.
Never in serious trouble.
Right, so you have to be very, very intentional. If a school, if everybody leaves, you're going to have to think about your transportation issues then, what the nature of that neighborhood looks like, and all those other ramifications.
And how about magnet schools? Are there magnet schools in Portland?
Yes, there are magnet schools in Portland.
Thank you.
I think unquestionably people know, and data shows, that parental involvement is the #1 factor in achievement. So have you seen successful models and programs that have encouraged parental engagement in communities?
Well, I think the nurse-family partnership is certainly, that's a very intensive, expensive version of that, where there's this one here, where you have a nurse come into the family very early, at a very early age, and interact and coach on parenting skills, etc. And then I would say that there are, the features of the pre-K programs all have wraparound services that are aimed at pulling the family in and engaging with the family deeply. Another piece, I do have the same piece. I've got 20, maybe 25 of these chart books here that I'll leave behind, that have more charts like the one that you saw on the 7th graders. There's one in here that's interesting with respect to chronic absenteeism. So chronic absenteeism, if a kid misses more than 10% of the school year, a national nonprofit has sort of deemed that chronically absent. And if you had to guess, you'd say, okay, well, chronic absenteeism probably really picks up in middle school and through high school until eventually kids drop out. And that's what we found. But we also found that there was very high chronic absenteeism in kindergarten and 1st grade, which was fascinating. And then also, we didn't have pre-K data for this, but if you went back a year in some other communities, you see it even higher in pre-kindergarten. So it simply underscores your point that we haven't come close to cracking that nut, but it unequivocally, we have programming out there, be it kindergarten, 1st grade, and pre-K, and we have not persuaded parents, because it's not the kids at that age saying, I'm just going to go hang out down at the convenience store. It's the parents that you haven't persuaded. Or, I'll give another plug to Lisa here, that the parents have so much going on in terms of trying to get back and forth to work, and transportation to coordinate, and maybe there's not a good nearby child care center for when the kindergarten day ends and they're still at work, etc. We haven't engaged with them, and we haven't helped them solve their challenges yet. And that's a national find. We found it in Oregon, but it's broadly discovered in every place we've looked.
data you shared regarding the top quartile of teacher results versus bottom quartile, has there been further research to identify what the qualities are between the two quartiles?
Right. You know, in terms of what would you, how would you predict a good teacher before they get into the classroom? Increasingly, what Gates, who's been doing most of this work, is concluding is that it is very hard to predict a good teacher until they're in the classroom. And they will, I think they can describe, and evaluators have built evaluations that sort of describe the various components of what makes a good classroom management skills, the content knowledge, you know, there's rubrics that sort of describe the characteristics. But in terms of trying to see somebody who's in a teacher preparation program and look at their SAT score and maybe you know, some kind of state test on skills and et cetera, and predict that they're going to be, that has not proved to be wildly successful. Now, Teach for America, I showed you they had an impact on here, and they do, and they've had, you know, they have a highly selective entry pipeline, and so that comes out on the other end as an effect. But there's still an awful lot of wide distribution of quality that's sitting in the system now as Gates is measuring it. It reminds me of a quote of University of Oregon's football coach who basically said, "I can't evaluate a quarterback, or quarterbacks are like tea. I don't know what I have until I put them in hot water." And so I think that's kind of what we have. You have to see them in practice.
I was just curious as to if you're familiar with any research that has to do with the achievement gap relative to the age of parents at the birth of their first child.
I'm sure there is some. And I have, yeah. And I just, that one's not.
Yeah.
You know,
Teen parent.
yeah,
Teen parents and lower achievement of their children and
right.
efforts to stem that.
One summer, many years ago, I tried to go to San Jose State to learn about how to be a teacher. And it was so horrendously awful. I'm wondering if there's any, with this advanced degree, because California requires that extra year,
Right.
do we have any quality analysis of whether, I mean,
Yep.
people who can't teach teachers, whatnot.
Right. And so this is another area where we have this rapidly, again, I'll apologize to the educators in the room. I know the standardized tests have been driving people nuts. And I think they've been misused in some respects, overused for some of the wrong reasons, but we are finally starting to harvest some of the useful aspects of this and these kinds of measurements. Lots of information now coming out of on the relative quality of teacher preparation programs. And there was a big study that just came out last month by an outfit that was paid. It's a teacher quality, help me, somebody in this room knows this. Yeah, thank you. Came out with a big thing, and it was going to be the sort of the U.S. news and report on teacher prep deals. And they went through, it was a very expensive, multi-year campaign to sort of review the curriculum and review the teaching practices and et cetera, all these teacher preparation programs. So you could sort of have consumer reports on teacher prep programs. And ultimately, my take on it is the reaction was, it was like trying to evaluate a business by studying all their business plans. Which was, it's kind of helpful. At some point it'll be helpful to know who has different business but really what you want to know are what are the profits of the business, and are they still in business, and are they making good things that are helpful to society. And so there, on the more helpful note, there have been 3 different studies by researchers that have used student data to look at teachers coming out of different teacher programs. essentially the findings are, this is in Washington and New York State and Florida, is that the relative impact of teacher programs is pretty narrow. That you can, between the best teacher prep program in the state and the worst teacher program in the state, you can find an effect. It's small relative to these ones that you've seen here. It's probably 0.6% of a percent. So down here, between sort of a really good one and the average. And then you do have some real dogs, and those show up. But it's relatively narrow range of quality.
I had one more question. The statistics that you're showing us of the difference between the impact of the top and the bottom quartile, it just makes me curious if there were specifics on what the characteristics of those teachers were. And if, I mean, intuitively, all of us would have come to that conclusion. It's nice to see the data.
Right.
And it makes me wonder if that helps districts and unions talk more realistically about what teachers to protect, what teachers to exit, what teachers to encourage. I don't know. It just seems the key is with our teachers. I mean,
so I need to have this answer, and I don't have it right now. But Gates literally spent gobs and gobs of money filming. They went in and they filmed effective teachers, and so they have if you go to it's called the MET project, Measuring Effective Teachers by Gates. You will find volume. It's been a 5 to 6 year huge exercise, and I'm sure they have a technical appendix that would blow your mind on what they have observed in terms of the body language and the amount of time spent on instruction versus the types of tasks that are engaged in, et cetera. How many different kids they talk to during the class period, those kinds of things. It is, if it hasn't been written up, it's on the verge of being written up in great detail.
Hi, thanks. Just a question. You had addressed the achievement gap, and early on you had mentioned the socioeconomic characteristics of kids or kids' families.